Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Bridget Eckert, and I'm the Director of Communications at the Indiana Arts Commission. I'm a white woman with blonde hair, and I have on an orange top, and I'm sitting in my living room with light blue walls. We are broadcasting to the world live through Facebook, so if you have any questions, please enter those in the comment section. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube and on our website at www.in.gov/arts under the training tab. So let's go ahead and kick it off. We are going to talk today about how artists are moving outside of the traditional gallery space due to the public health crisis and just for fun in general. This goes beyond making sure that your online store and social channels are up to date, although that's really important, so don't forget to do that. We're also going to take a look at net art and how it could be a great way to think outside of traditional art spaces and create digital public artworks. Joining us today is Jana Art, a visiting professor at IU Bloomington. All right, let's go ahead and kick it off. First things first, I'll have you introduce yourself, Jana, and give a description of your appearance and setting for our viewers with visual impairments.
Hi, everybody. Like Bridget said, my name is Jana Arndt. I am a visiting professor in the digital art department at IU Bloomington. I am a blonde white woman in my apartment, as everyone is, I feel like right now. I have white walls and a creepy dress form with a black wig on it behind me.
Love it. I love that so much. Thank you so much for joining us, Jana. I also would like to say about Jana. Jana participated in the Indiana Arts Commission's On-Ramp Creative Accelerator program. So she has a wealth of knowledge and so glad for her to be joining us today. Okay, without further ado, you want to go ahead and share your screen and dive right in with the presentation?
Sure, I will get started. Oh, and I will also be talking about the project that was partially funded by the Indiana Arts Commission today in my presentation. So if anybody's curious, I'll talk about that a little bit later.
Awesome, I'm curious for sure.
Great, okay, so let me know if you can see everything the way that you should. Can you see everything? All right. So hello, everyone. I just wanted to take today, this rainy Monday, to talk a little bit about art and the internet. So I was already introduced, but I thought I would give a little bit more information about myself and kind of my road into how I started making digital art or net art or all of the weird artworks that I make. So I am actually a native of Waterloo, Indiana. So if you know, it's up north past Fort Wayne, past Auburn. If you've been to the Auburn Court-Duesenberg Festival, it's up north past that, and that's where I'm from. It's kind of a tiny town in the middle of nowhere. I got my bachelor's of linguistics from Purdue University. And then I received my Master's of Fine Art in Electronic Time-Based Art in 2019, which is considered like the terminal degree for a fine artist. And then I was given the opportunity to teach here at IU Bloomington at the Eskenazi School of Art, Architecture, and Design. So I am a visiting art professor here. What I teach is largely about digital art and net art and this interactive medium that we find ourselves more and more using in this digital age. So as Bridget had said, this presentation is going to be a lot about well, it's going to be a lot of relevant information about how we can move towards the internet in our art practices, but it's also going to be about the history of the internet and artists that have been doing this all along. Because as we're going to look at, as long as there has been computers and computing technology, just like with all new technologies, artists are some of the first people to co-opt those technologies. So this really isn't about like this unique situation that we're in. It's actually got a very rich artistic history as well. So, in my opinion, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who believes this as well, all discussions of art and their relationship to computers should really begin with this woman who is Ada Lovelace. So, if you've not heard of Ada Lovelace, she was an extremely gifted mathematician in the early 1800s. When women weren't really allowed to go to school for such things. They weren't allowed to necessarily attend public universities for mathematics, let alone publish any ideas in academic journals. So she actually began working alongside Charles Babbage, who was another early mathematician in England. And he's kind of known as the father of computers. So she, as a teen, as a white woman, even though she did have a lot of things going against her as being a female, she was also very wealthy in a high-standing family. So she did get this opportunity to work with Charles Babbage as a teenager. So she was really interested in his project that's kind of given him the name of being like the founding father of computers, the Analytical Engine, which is, it was this giant calculating machine. You can Google images of it. It almost looks like a train car. It's huge. But essentially it was the earliest computer that calculated mathematical equations. It was a very simplified calculator, essentially. But she actually, while she was working along with Charles Babbage, created the first computer program. So not only could she calculate this mathematical equation using this machine, but she was also able to program it to do something else as well. And part of why she is so important to this idea of combining art and mathematics, or art and science and technology, is because part of this logic that she was working through with this computational machine, she actually borrowed from her artistic senses outside of her mathematic ability. So she took the logic of this binary system of kind of ones and zeros, how we think of computer thought, and she equated it to the idea of knitting stitches, which she was very familiar with, being a woman in the mid 1800s, but she also had a love of music. So not only was she infatuated with everything mathematical, but she was also among the first to question this false binary between art and the humanities and science and technology. So she really believed there was a way to combine these two things and to make something more meaningful. So she valued personally computers and mathematics and music equally, and envisioned a world where these two things would work together. So jumping ahead a long time, like 100 years or so, computers are slowly being developed, and the internet is born. We'll just skip through all of that. So in 1969, we see the Arpanet project being funded by ARPA, which was part of the government. It is falsely, well, not necessarily falsely, but it is overly generalized to think that the internet was born of this idea of the military-industrial complex. It's actually much more complicated than that. But there tends to be this sentiment of the internet that it was really born out of the fear of the nuclear era, which is both true and not true, just like most facts are. But ARPA was really born out of this idea of a desire to share knowledge in the academic community. So these scientific communities, they, up until the internet, you can imagine if we have a bunch of people all over the world, all experts in their field studying different things, we'd probably have a lot of overlap, because unless you meet somebody in person at a conference or happen to read somebody's paper, you might end up doing a lot of the same research. And so a lot of people in the scientific community weren't necessarily satisfied with that mode of communication and thought that science and these ideas could be furthered quicker by being able to share all of this knowledge instantaneously through some different medium. So Arpanet was kind of born out of this idea of shared knowledge. So eventually ARPA became DARPA because of various political reasons. So DARPA became the defense version of this ARPA governmental project. And that's when we see the involvement of the military industrial complex, because we see this desire to decentralize communication, meaning like instead of having one hub, let's say, of communication satellites or one hub of wires that lead to all of the telephones, what if you could have all knowledge dispersed evenly among technologies, right? It would be much more difficult for the Russians, for instance, in this case, to bomb us and take out all of our communication if it was a decentralized system in which everyone could participate equally. So that was kind of like a precaution of this nuclear war era, but it was actually not so much created because of it, but was a lucky side effect of what this ARPANET project was already creating due to this desire of shared knowledge. So eventually we just have this connection of like 4 supercomputers all connected to the net, which is just them sharing information back and forth. And we also see that in this time, so we're kind of skipping forward a little bit, the graphical interface for computers was really non-existent. So this image that I'm showing right now is a later iteration. So we're talking like late 70s, early 80s iteration of what computer technology looked like. Up until this, there were no graphical user interfaces for computers. So they typically just looked like giant typewriter machines that you had to understand all of the functions and how to be able to enter those without really getting any output visually from a screen, which seems like a wild way to operate computers now to us, but back then that was just kind of typical, right? So this idea of the typewriter had kind of evolved from, just being a word processing apparatus to this computational machine, which was allowing you to do different calculations or serve different functions. So it was typically just if it had a screen at all, a black screen with glaring bright green or white typeface on it that would ask you if you had a command prompt, and you would have to know exactly what you wanted to do and how to do it. And so that was really limiting, because we see, especially with the expense of computers at the time, it wasn't really easy for the general public to use them. So it was typically seen that they were for scientists, engineers, researchers, people that worked at universities. Those were the types of people who had access to these technologies. But in the 70s, researchers at the Xerox Research Park, or PARC, Adele Goldberg and Alan Kay began to envision a computer as a portable, user-friendly device capable of much more than just mathematical computation. And they wanted to have a computer be user interactive, user-friendly, no longer just for people who knew exactly what they wanted to do and how to do it, but more of a symbiotic relationship between a user as programmer and also getting this graphical feedback from the computer as well. So in 1980, they invented this language, this computer coding language that they called Smalltalk 80. So this computer language utilized a monitor, much like how we envision using a computer now, especially if you have a desktop versus mobile, which is its own user interface, right? That's very different. But it's really breaking up these different functions that you're trying to do into these windows, or like the rectangles, right, that we see on the screen that are running different operations. There was graphical output. So if I, let's say, wanted to store a file, instead of having to type into the interface and understand what functions I needed to know in order to pull up that file again from my hard drive, I could just click on a file folder that had documents inside of it, right? So we had like a much more user-friendly GUI or a GUI or graphical user interface. So skipping ahead, this was their dream, was to have users and programmers being the same people, because their dream in creating this programming language was that people could explore their computers and have a working relationship with their computers. So eventually Steve Jobs came along and stole many of these ideas from these researchers and started implementing them in the Apple computers or the Windows machines that we saw of the 80s and early 90s. So the main goal of these, with the implementation of Windows machines and Apple machines, we kind of see the idea or the essence of this dream that the Xerox PARC researchers had kind of dying, because now with the Apple computer and the Windows machine, the technology was much easier to use. So more of the general public could understand and use their computer for daily tasks. However, it completely separates this idea of the user versus the developer, because in these computers, the interfaces don't allow us to see what is actually happening. So it kind of hides all of the underworking, all of the machinery, right, I guess, of the software of the computer. And because we're hiding that, these companies see this as highly profitable, right? Because we, as the users, rely on how these developers or these programmers are programming these graphical interfaces for us to use. So they're not only hiding from us what is actually happening, they're also making it harder to understand by developing different languages that might be more complex or harder for us to understand as lay people. So jumping ahead even more, and if you're interested in all of this, there are so many histories and documentaries and books you can read on these topics. I do have some resources at the end if you guys are interested as well in learning more about all of this history yourself, because I'm really jumping and generalizing here. But after we get this idea of the graphical user interface, we start to see the expansion of the internet. So up until like the late 80s, the internet, though it existed, wasn't really for lay people. It was mostly just for universities, for the military or the government, and it was really hard to use. So while these graphical user interfaces were taking place on our computers, the internet didn't really look like that. The internet kind of just looked like that black screen with like some white text on it, and you had to know how to call certain computers and get information, and it was all a jumble, and it wasn't very user friendly. So once the 90s come around, we see this World Wide Web start to appear. So it was difficult to navigate prior to the World Wide Web, like I was saying. And Ted Nelson came up with this idea while using computers. He was unsatisfied with how computers worked in general, because we had gone from our pen and our paper to a digital screen, but the digital screen was still functioning quite a bit like a pad of paper, right? So it was, our word processing hadn't really expanded. We'd just gone from physical to digital. So he came up with this idea of hypertext. And hypertext was his vision of this power of a new shared medium where you could move beyond the idea of a computer as a digital pen and paper, it would move towards like an interactive multimedia experience. And you would be able to reference things from the past. You would be able to link to different types of mediums, so like videos, sound, other people's comments, prior iterations of the document if it had been edited, all of those things. And I kind of like to think of this as like, well, a simplified idea of this hypertext idea would be like a Wikipedia article, where as you're reading, you can still click on these links and kind of go down a rabbit hole of like information, right? All of these sources and information. So he had this idea of hypertext, but then we see Tim Berners-Lee in 1990 releases or starts working on the World Wide Web, which was released to the public in 1991. And this was just a space where we're taking this idea of the GUI interface and moving it online and making it more accessible to everybody. So this is where we see the development of the idea of the URL, right? So our little address, our web address on how to find our web pages. We also see this idea of hypertext established inside websites. So no longer are websites just pools of text and information. Now you could have media of all kinds, right? So you could link to videos, you could have sound, you could have moving components, images, all of those things. And the idea was really to create this more democratic system of dispersed knowledge. So, like I was saying, net art isn't new, and it can include many things, but it is essentially just art that is made on, inspired by, or for the internet. So it can encompass many forms of computer-generated art, and now also phone or tablet generated art as well, that can exist online or offline. So that was a lot of setup for me to get to my main point and why I'm kind of here right now. So hopefully you're not too bored. But I am here to ask you to consider using your creative voice online. So I think we can all agree sitting here in 2020 that the dream of this democratization of knowledge online on the internet as some kind of utopia is dead, right? We have fake news, we have a lot of hacking, we have a lot of doxing, we have a lot of issues surrounding the internet right now in 2020 that the developers of the internet probably did not foresee. However, I, like many in my field, believe that our only way through is, or our only way out is through, right? So the idea that we're all going to return to the physical space is a myth, right? The Pandora's box is already open. And for now, I think for better or worse, we need to view the digital space not only as a tool or a medium to create art, but also as an environment that we spend an increasingly large amount of time living in, right? So it's not really something that we can choose to ignore at this point. So while there are many definitions of what the internet actually is, I really enjoyed this definition from the critical engineers and artists, though they don't call themselves that, Julian Oliver and Danya Vasiliev. So they have defined the internet as a misunderstood set of technologies upon which we increasingly depend. And while they stated this, I think around 2011, long before COVID, I think that we can all agree that this is more and more relatable today as I give you this presentation via Zoom instead of in person. So this idea of a system of users versus developers, as I was discussing earlier, is not serving us. as we see, especially with all of the hearings surrounding our social media moguls, it is increasingly important that we kind of take back freedom of our digital lives. And it is important that we have a baseline of digital literacy and understanding of the technologies that largely shape our social, economic, and political lives, right? So I'm here to beg you, I guess, that as artists and creatives, we have a unique ability to view, shape, and critique the world around us and treat it differently, right? As artists, we can use our art to hold a mirror up to society and shift its vision of itself. So you can ask questions of society and provide different ways of doing. So, well, I have this big ask, I guess, which you can choose to ignore or not. It's fine. There are also many benefits to moving your art practice towards being online as a medium. So my biggest, the biggest excitement for me as a web artist and educator is this idea of a low threshold. So all you need to become a net artist is probably what you have right now. So you have an internet connection if you're watching this, and you already have a computer if you're watching this as well, or a phone, because a lot of this you can largely do on your phone as well. The knowledge is largely free. So net art, unlike, like other different types of art mediums that you might need to go to, like an atelier or something, to study for many years in order to become good, all of the knowledge that you need to make art online is online, and a lot of it is free. In fact, most of it is free. Other technologists and artists, especially in this open source movement, share what they have. They share what they've already made. They share the knowledge that they've found online. The other reason why I'm so excited about internet art in general is that it provides a full range of artistic mediums, including performance, video, sound, image making, but beyond representation, if that kind of art making bores you, it also provides an opportunity for us to interact with our audience through engagement, right? Or through physical action. So you can think about live performances taking place through Zoom, different types of virtual reality, augmented reality, digital social action through social media platforms. All of these things kind of open up this art world to artists. So the other thing that excites me about digital art is this idea of subversion. So beyond, and maybe that's the rebel in me, but beyond the traditional art realm, outside of your fancy galleries and $1 million paintings and art auctions, you don't need to be accepted to exhibit online. And because of that, a lot of the most radical, interesting, in my opinion, work happening right now is happening online and not in galleries. You can question existing power structures here, right? You're not really limited by what curators think your art is worth looking at, or pressured into making things that you think might sell, because oftentimes, and maybe I shouldn't say this, net art is free, right? So no one has to necessarily pay to see it. So you can question these existing power structures. You can use subversion of technology. You can ask users to question how we've been told things should be done or how things should be used, right? Or even question the art world in general and how we decide whose work should be seen and whose work shouldn't. So I wanted to walk through some net art now. So we'll take a look at some early net art. So we'll take a look at who the artists were. First, we're going to start off with like Web 1.0, which was essentially just static web pages with no user interface. But I also wanted to point out that a lot of artists that I'm going to show are not experienced web designers. And I think that is the biggest, reprehension that people have with starting this kind of art practice, is that like, I don't have any art, or I don't have any digital skills. I would argue that your artistic thought process is more important than your ability to use the technology. And I also find that in a lot of these projects as well, even if the artists don't have the digital coding prowess to create these different artworks, there are plenty of technologists who are willing to collaborate as well. So the art space is also a very collaborative space. So one of, especially if you take any kind of net art history class or net art class, one of the most prolific examples of early net art is this piece, My Boyfriend Came Back from the War, from 1996. It's still up and running. So if you click this link, it will show you what the website is actually like. It's archived on the internet. You can still experience it. So this work largely took the platform of the website, the web page, to tell a story in a non-linear way. So this piece is largely about storytelling. It has quite a cinematic quality to it, especially with this like art kind of noir lighting scape that is there. But it's really thinking about how to use the HTML code and the interaction of just someone moving through a browser space on a website in order to interact with this story of this female character whose boyfriend came back from the war and what that is like. And this kind of like this storytelling scape. But I highly suggest you take a look at that. So another piece that was created in 1997 is My Body. So this one also is archived online, which you can still interact with. It essentially walks you through this like poetic version of storytelling where you can go through the different parts of this body, and it tells an interactive story through how you move through this space. And I find this one very interesting because we do, especially as net artists, or artists in general now, working with this medium, this digital medium, we tend to think of it as separate from the physical space or separate from our physical bodies. And I feel as though, especially now, that's largely less true as we spend more and more time online. What does it mean to inhabit your body online? So this piece is also extremely interesting. So I will share this PowerPoint as well with all of these links if you are interested in experiencing these yourself. So another piece that uses this hypertext medium of interaction is Keeping Up Appearances from 2001. Essentially, it is a website which is largely white with some text on it. And then it has, as you work through this online space, this web page, as you move through the space, if your mouse or your cursor goes over one of these white spaces, the subtext of the story is revealed to you. So in this way, we kind of see this surface level story in the black and white web page, and then the underpinnings or the all of the important hidden information about this event, which is quite traumatic, is revealed only through your cursor hovering over these elements. So net art today continues to exist. So it's still happening. Those are some early examples. So we're going to move forward into now. Artists create these pieces in much the same way, but they have adapted platforms as these technologies have adapted. So I really like this quote, to use a tool as it was intended, whether a screwdriver or a spreadsheet, is simply to fulfill its potential. By misusing that tool, that is, by peeling off its ideological wrapper and applying it to a purpose or effect that was not its maker's intention, artists can exploit a technology's hidden potential in an intelligent and revelatory way, right? So that's essentially what we're asking net artists to do, is peel away these different expectations that we have of the internet and how it should or should not function, and explore that. And I think it's also really important just to think about questioning these systems. So another one of these examples is Glitcher. So I will show this video. It's quite loud, so you might want to brace yourself. Hopefully. Maybe.
Link, more button. Link, link, link image, link, list, link, 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 link image, link, 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 link image, Derek S. Link, link image, dot link, 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 more pop-up button, link, link, move, note, boost post pop-up button, link, glitch or shared a link, get web page, add, nanny, screen, scroll, leaving tool, link, Facebook, visited link, home, 1-3, account set, change, visited link, glitch per button, up, see more, edit button, link, location, edit button, edit, visited link, Limonazakas, link, 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 cookies, 100% volume, 049/427, vertical slider,
So you could kind of get an idea of this piece. So Laimonas Zakas is a Lithuanian artist who uses glitches within website code in order to kind of create a mess out of the user's screen and also kind of turn these websites inside out. So there was an earlier work called Shredder, which did largely the same thing by taking all of the code from different websites and essentially turning it inside out, allowing the user to see what was behind the scenes. And the whole thought process in works like these is to make what was invisible visible and take control away from the programmer and create a loss of perceived control for the user, right? So it's really revealing what is actually behind all of these websites and revealing that to the users. So that's an example of online intervention. And from here, I'm gonna do a quick run through of different online interventions that artists have done. So James Bertall is an Instagram artist. He's a net artist, but he largely uses Instagram as his gallery, if I will, of this type of work. So he took posts of strike zones, military strike zones from the Middle East, took photos of these places and put them in a gallery on Instagram, which he calls Dronestagram. And this is one way that we're seeing digital artists or web artists kind of move towards more traditional mediums, right? So this is essentially a photography or photo-based art practice, but we're taking these images from a web source. So largely we can think of them as being taken from, well, drone technology here, which would not be available to us without the internet, right? So we can see how these traditional art mediums and the internet can kind of interact with each other and form a dialogue that is more meaningful through taking place on the internet. So here he's really like asking the user to view all of these spaces, and he's not asking them to necessarily make a value judgment, but it is allowing us as viewers to view these places of drone strikes and form an attachment to them. So another work in a similar vein is John Rothman's 9 Eyes. So this is, again, another way that net artists are using this medium of photography, or using the net to question the medium of photography. So he took this archive of street views. So he just scrolled through Google Street View. If you've ever done this, I do this all the time, and just chose random locations and started looking through different street views and took screenshots of different images that were taken from the Google Street View that he found compelling. So in 2008, he had created 9 Eyes of Google Street View in a PDF and collected all of these images, but then he moved them to a Tumblr gallery so that people could view as he continually populated this Tumblr gallery with new and more interesting images. So he is really looking at this idea of street photography as a traditional medium, right? Where a lot of it is all based on this idea of framing the perfect shot based on, you know, your elements and your principles of design and art making, where this Google Street View camera doesn't really discern any type of framing. It's not worried about aesthetics. It's just driving around gathering information for Google. So he was really interested in this idea of what it means to take photos without this bias of the human eye or the photographer. And then also, what does it mean to then reinterpret that back, bringing the human element back into it by selecting these images, right? So he's not taking all images from Google Street View, but he's collecting, he's discerning or curating specific shots from this Google Street View. And I do have a link to the website. It's still being populated, so it still has new images all the time. So another way that traditional art mediums and current art mediums are, or net art mediums are communicating through this idea of art history, is this project. So I don't know how much you know about Sherry Levine's piece After Walker Evans from 1981. Walker Evans photographed these sharecroppers during the Dust Bowl, which I'm sure you've seen these images of Depression era families. He was largely viewed as kind of a huge jerk and a bit of a misogynist. And Sherry Levine in the 80s, so like in 1979 or so, decided to re-photograph his photographs and call them her own, because she was appropriating his pieces and taking some of the power back for these subjects. So then Michael Mandelberg came along in 2001 and created AfterWalkerEvans.com, which took this idea of power and traditional fine art to its maximum, because he went through, scanned the same photographs from After Walker Evans and created After Walker Evans and AfterSherryLevine.com to facilitate like this dissemination of these artworks, which he made, you know, infinite amounts of money off of. Walker Evans did. And made them free. So he put them online, anyone can download them, and you can also get a certificate of authenticity from this website that authenticates these images, which theoretically would give them value in a traditional artistic sense, right? If we were thinking about selling very expensive works of art, if you got a certificate of authenticity with your artwork, it would be worth more. But in this case, because he's distributing it on the web for anyone to download and anyone to get these certificates of authenticity, it efficiently devalues the artwork entirely. So another group of artists is the yes men. So they're largely looked at as tactical media artists. So they take on the media and use it as their artistic medium. So here we have a fake New York Times. So this is a project from 2009. They decided to design, print, and distribute a fake New York Times newspaper with all of the news that they wish they were seeing. So for instance, you can see here on their website version, the Iraq War ends, which obviously did not happen, but they created an entire New York Times from cover to cover, a fake New York Times full of these like more optimistic stories in order to show people a world in which what they wanted to happen happened. So it was an important step in this tactical media environment to get people to think about how they could make these dreams a reality politically. So the Yes Men are known for making all kinds of different fake websites that kind of parade as big businesses, as different politicians, and take this idea of subversion and humor to the extreme. And they often pretend to be people of authority that they are not. I have linked to a list of all of their fake websites. They also have 2 documentaries if you're interested in learning more about them. So another art piece, I'm going to quickly talk about 2 more. This piece, Art Thoughts, is a relatively newer piece that takes place on YouTube, actually. So YouTube is the art medium in this case. But it's a performance piece where Jason Mousson is an artist who has created this alternate ego or alternate personality called Hennessy Youngman, where he creates this fake vlog on YouTube and discusses different thoughts about the contemporary art world. So he offers advice and criticism related to the contemporary art scene. He kind of plays into this idea of the opposite of what we would view a traditional artist to be, whatever that means. So he often wears like kind of like kitschy clothing or dresses up with a lot of pop cultural icons. But then he's delivering these well-informed, thoughtful critiques on stereotypical issues within the contemporary art world. So he's also doing this as a Black man and a Black artist. And so he's also has layers of critiquing our expectations of the art world, because he does these well-informed, thoughtful critiques in a stereotypical urban Black vernacular that really questions like why we find this to be less, I don't know, less important than a professor giving a lecture if his advice and his critique of the art world is the same. So it's an extremely interesting piece. He has, I forget how many, I think he might have up to 30 videos in this series, but it's quite good. It's amazing. It's really critiquing the art system and art theory and all of these exclusionary spaces that artists typically function in. So in the same vein, the last piece that I wanted to talk about, which is fairly popular, is Keith Obadiah's Blackness for Sale. So Keith Obadiah is a artist and a composer, and he actually went about auctioning his blackness online on eBay. So here we're seeing not even a social media platform, but a online selling application as an art medium. So he set out a press release and announced, because he was a fairly well-known artist at this time, that he was selling his blackness online on eBay in an online auction. So he quotes, "This heirloom has been in the possession of the seller for 28 years. Mr. Obadiah's blackness has been used primarily in the United States, and its functionality outside of the US cannot be guaranteed. Buyer will receive a certificate of authenticity. This blackness may be used for creating Black art, making jokes about Black people, and or laughing at Black humor comfortably. So he goes on and on, giving all of these kind of tongue-in-cheek ways in which someone might want to use his Blackness. And it's also questioning, you know, what we've been questioning largely this year, especially is the value of Blackness in America, and what, how different cultures have appropriated this idea of Blackness when it's convenient and condemned it when it's not. So quickly, I'm just going to run through my personal work. So I technically exist in this idea of culture jamming and tactical media. So I'm really taking a look at this idea of art and activism and where these things can mingle in the same space. And I'm also really interested in social aesthetics, which is more of an emphasis on social art practice as opposed to making things attractive. I'm more interested in working with communities in order to make stuff. So the project, like Bridget had said at the beginning, that was partially funded from the Indiana Arts Commission through my grant for the On-Ramp program in 2019 was Patch. So Patch was actually a piece that I had been working on in my MFA degree. And I had opportunities to further this project internationally, but I did not have the funds to do so. And so that's where On-Ramp really helped me out quite a bit. So Patch was this piece of tactical gizmology, which is just a fancy way of saying like a homemade gadget for a subversive purpose. And I was really curious about this idea of do-it-yourself techno-craftivism. So I was interested in this idea of Fitbits and self-tracking, but how they could form themselves into some kind of art-making process. So I created the Fitbit, which I say in this blurb, like a Fitbit for your ethical performance. Patch is a textile-based new media project that uses light, social media, and social media to allow the user to track their progress as an advocate for an environmental, ethical stance. Patch workshops are built to create a space for creativity and discussion surrounding the conflict between personal and corporate accountability to affect change. So once I had my funding from IIC in order to actually create the technology for these pieces, I had the opportunity to travel with it to all kinds of places, including South Korea, Australia. I've been to Dublin, I've been to Scotland, giving these workshops in which people make their own do-it-yourself ethical tracking device. So this was an example supply list of the different supplies that we used, but essentially the idea of it is that people would come to these workshops. I would provide for them these different technological components, as well as the code and all of the knowledge that they need to code their own device. And they would build their device, understand how it worked, and then take it home with them. So this device itself actually sensed the CO2 in the air surrounding the participants, sent that CO2 data to the cloud, my database somewhere, wherever, whatever. And then I worked along with a colleague from Australia who created this live updatable P5 sketch or processing sketch, which tracked this data and showed it real time on a screen in the middle of Melbourne University. So here you can see on the screen all 50 of the devices that we had distributed to participants who had built their own, tracking the CO2 data, the daily average here on screen. And the idea was that these participants would continue to wear these CO2 trackers throughout the weeks that this gallery show was up, and that they would also track their own data of how they felt that they were contributing or not contributing to this CO2 data. So like if they rode their bike to work instead of drove, perhaps they would feel positively and hit the green button on their patch, or perhaps they felt that they were impacting it negatively and hit the red button on their patch. So we also had a sense of this self-tracking data as well. So moving forward in time, patch largely took place in 2019. This is another work that I created online called Make Floors Great Again, which is a piece that hijacks the clean function of my Roomba, which I have lovingly gilded in a lovely gold flake. And it only runs a cleaning cycle each time Donald Trump tweets. So it is largely connected to Twitter, to specifically Donald Trump's Twitter feed, and cleans my floor each time he tweets. My idea behind this piece was much in the ethical stance of all of these artwork pieces, and just getting people to think about how we can jolt ourselves into questioning ways that these marketed tools are created, and how we can make them work for our own means or work for our own ends. So how could you tweak these technologies that are largely made for our convenience and, I don't know, use them as a kind of guerrilla art tactic? So that was kind of the spirit that Make Floors Great Again was created in. Here you can see the website that I have created for it. I actually had the opportunity to show this piece. I was supposed to go to a CICA conference in South Korea in order to show it, but because of COVID, I couldn't do that. So I created a online web space for this kind of, I call it a performance piece where really the robot is performing, but it live streamed my apartment, specifically my Roomba. So each time Donald Trump tweeted over the week that this show was going on in South Korea, the viewers there could watch my Roomba clean my floors. So here you can see somebody interacting with Trump in the gallery inside IU Bloomington at the Grunwald Gallery. It's really interesting because people usually either equate the Roomba with Trump himself, or some people actually see the Roomba as more of an empathetic character that's kind of like a slave to me or to Trump, I guess, that's making it constantly run. As you can imagine, he tweets quite often, so the floors were quite clean in the gallery space.
Jana, thank you so much for sharing. We're moving right to the end of time. And I want to make sure everybody knows where to find this information. And you had mentioned that you're going to be sharing all of these awesome links, and then also your presentation. Thank you so much for doing that. I just wanted to let everybody know who's visited us that net art, from what Jana has said, really connects with me in terms of questioning norms, right? And also staying connected. And I think those are two really important things that art can do. We will send out a email tomorrow with all of the resources that Jana talked about during the webinar, as well as a recording that will be housed on YouTube. So thank you so much, Jana, for joining us. And thank you everybody that joined us on Facebook. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.